welcome to the Contemporary Hour at the Sligo International Chamber Music Festival 2021. Thanks for joining us for this concert of 3 newly commissioned works by composers from Ireland. I'm Evonne Ferguson, Director of the Contemporary Music Centre, and I'm delighted to bring you some short conversations with the composers featured in this concert. I'm also delighted to be joined by the Festival Director, Caroline Wynne. Caroline, the Sligo International Chamber Music Festival, it really has such a rich history of commissioning new music and supporting composers, both emerging and established.
Yes, Evonne, we had our very first festival in Sligo in 2000, and we're very proud that our first commissioned composer was Donnacha Dennehy back in 2000, and his wonderful work Counting, which has gone on to have many outings since then. So that was our first festival, first commission, and over the years we've had 14 different premieres and commissions of Irish works by Irish composers. So yeah, it's been very, very much central and at the heart of the programming of the festival.
Yeah, and really contributing to the repertoire of contemporary music, which is wonderful for the festival. And you know, it strikes me that the commissions at the festival, they always, you know, the composer always works very closely with yourself and with the Vogler Quartet, who are the artistic directors, or with the other performers who are going to premiere the work.
Yeah, it is very much collaborative. We decide on a commission, we decide on what it's for. It's always been included the Vogler Quartet at the centre of the commission. So that's very much part of it as well, that we have a quartet of the calibre of the Voglers premiering something as well, which is it's a very strong part of the outcome and the performance of the work at the end. So the Voglers then have a discussion with the composers. Sometimes the composers have even been to Berlin for rehearsals, in the case of Nick Roth last year and Dermot Dunne, which was our most recent work up until this year. We had Nick Roth writing a work for Dermot Dunne and the Voglers. So they did some rehearsing in Berlin as well. So yeah, over the years, yeah, it's been central to it, and I suppose that happened organically. The first commission that I was involved in was the 2000, and I suppose I thought that's the way it should be, and I thought that would be the natural course of it. So it just went forward that way. And we also wanted to include the Vogler expertise as well, and their long association with performing contemporary music around the world. So so it's been a journey, and a very, very successful journey, and just an interesting one. Over the years, we've commissioned Deirdre McKay, Elaine Agnew, Gerald Barry twice, Stephen Gardner, Saoirse Bodley, just so many, 14 in total, and our most recent one in 2019 was Nick Roth. So that's been the journey of commissioning in Sligo with the Voglers.
Some great names there, of course, Caroline, that you've told us about. You know, some of our finest composers, 3 very fine composers, and again that ethos continuing in the commissions this year, where the composers have worked very closely with the performers, and that's a new work by Benedict Schlepper-Connolly that we will hear for Fionnuala Moynihan for piano, a new work for Malachy Robinson double bass by Deirdre Gribbin, and by Judith Ring for Dermot Dunne on the accordion.
Yes, well, I suppose the fact that we've survived as a Chamber Music Festival for 22 years, this would have been the 22nd Chamber Music Festival, means that the support of Sligo County Council has just been, it's been the wind beneath the wings of the festival, and the direction, everything. So in their wisdom last year, when we shut down the festival, it's always made bank holiday weekend, so there was no doubt but that it had to go last year. We decided to spend the year and the time and budget on planning ahead for this year. And one of the things we felt very strong about was that we would ensure that contemporary composers were supported, and the only way we could do that was working through the commissioning process. And also we felt that the Irish performers, last year Dermot, Fionnuala and Malachy, were cancelled from the festival because the festival was gone. So we thought a nice legacy of that would be that we would invite the 3 composers to write something for those three musicians, three solo works. And I suppose my thinking on the solo work is that it could have been rehearsed and learned without having to have ensemble playing in the time that we were in, but also that it could have a nice long lifespan into the future and a memory for the performers that they were written, commissioned, rehearsed, recorded all in this time. That we might have missed out on a lot of other things, Evonne, but I think the one thing we will have is very good recordings going forward to show what we were about in 2020.
Absolutely. What a gift. 3 new works and, as you say, the recordings and the wonderful collaborative process that's happened over the last new year. Let's enjoy these 3 new works from Benedict Schlepper-Connolly, Deirdre Gribbin and Judith Ring across the contemporary hour. I'm delighted to be joined by composer Benedict Schlepper-Connolly, and we're about to hear the premiere performance of your new work, Ben, After, which I'm really looking forward to hearing. And I had the great pleasure of hearing a little bit earlier on in the rehearsal. And just tell us a little bit about the title, Ben. It's called After, and there are some distant echoes of Mozart.
Yeah, thanks very much, Evonne. So the piece is called After, which is, I suppose, the point of time that it was written, which was over the last few months, the early part of this year. It's kind of looking forwards a little bit to the concept of an after to the time we're in at the moment, really. So that's really where the title comes from. And that's relevant, I think, because in the early part of the pandemic, I spent a lot of time listening to Mozart's piano sonatas. Pretty much obsessively on a loop. And I think part of that was just there's something about the kind of clarity and the kind of sureness of what's going on in those that was really, really attractive for probably obvious reasons at the time. So there's definitely a lot of that music has lingered with me since then. And there was there's one Fantasia in C minor, which is sort of in that collection as well, that really, really stuck with me and is kind of echoed throughout this piece now.
What I've heard of it, Ben, in the rehearsal just now, it's very pianistic, and it was written especially for Fionnuala. It's a festival commission. Did you collaborate very closely with Fionnuala when you were writing the work during that time?
Not really, because we couldn't really. We couldn't meet, which is something I love to do as part of that kind of process. So everything was kind of remote. So it was a much more kind of traditional composition process, I suppose. But I have to say, just from hearing Fionnuala interpret the piece so far, almost as if I'm a dead composer, has interpreted it really beautifully and really got into the spirit of the piece. And maybe some of that as well is that there are, while most of the kind of Mozart influences of it are unrecognisable, I'd say, at this stage, maybe there's some of the kind of pianistic character of that has just kind of worked its way through. So I won't take credit for that. Yeah.
Have you built in any kind of freedoms for the performer, or is it all very tightly scored?
It's pretty tightly scored, but there are a lot of tempo shifts throughout the piece, so it's drifting constantly between slower and faster tempos. And there's a little bit of kind of interpretive work there, just getting from A to B in those that's really left to the performer. And then there are kind of little subtleties of variation as well that are kind of quite specifically scored in the piece. Just little, a note might be repeated, but it might come a little millisecond later. But there are other elements just in terms of kind of phrasing and dynamics and so on that I think are kind of left quite open.
I mean, like many composers, Ben, you've so many different influences on your own work, and yet you're always constantly striving, like every composer, to find your own musical voice. But it didn't really surprise me when I read about the work and the Mozart references were there, because some of your earlier work as well touches on Bach and early music. You very much see yourself in that great, wonderful lineage of European Western art music.
I certainly have a great affection for it, have spent a lot of time steeped in that music, as well as many, many other kinds of music and other traditions. So I wouldn't place myself in the lineage in any kind of comparison with the sort of people that you're talking about. But it's just, I mean, it's very, very rich, very, very rich collection of music and tradition, like you say, and sometimes when you spend a lot of time in it, it sort of naturally influences your own work.
As an artist, Ben, as a composer in the last 13, 14 plus months, how have you dealt with the challenges of the pandemic, of not knowing exactly maybe when a work would be performed, the context of how it would be performed? Today's work has been recorded. Unfortunately, there's no audience, and no audience can travel to Sligo to enjoy this work. And how have you dealt with that in your own creativity?
Well, I suppose a lot of my focus in the past has been actually on recording. A lot of my work has been as a composer, but also as a producer. And so the last year has actually been quite interesting in that it's shown a new light on that whole practice and kind of given new opportunities around it as well. So, I mean, those of us involved in recording will have been telling you for years that this is a way to bring the music to a much wider audience, and it's I guess it's been proved in the last year that a lot of events going online, a lot of things that maybe would have been performed to 40 or 50 people in a small theatre can now reach thousands. So that is a positive aspect of the last year.
Yeah, no, definitely.
One of the very few, but I suppose from my perspective, I've been kind of happy to see that happen.
Yeah, that kind of dissemination has been really wonderful, and access for people in different areas of the country, different areas of the world, to different types of music. Well, it's been a great pleasure to chat to you. Benedict Schlepper-Connolly and his work after a festival commission for Sligo International Chamber Music Festival 2021.
Thanks very much, Evonne.
I'm delighted to be performing a piece for you now, a specially commissioned piece for this festival. It was composed by Benedict Schlepper-Connolly and it's called After.
Deirdre Gribbin, great to see you, and really looking forward to hearing the premiere of this new work that's being premiered by Malachy Robinson on double bass at today's Contemporary Hour in the Sligo International Chamber Music Festival 2021. It's called Maps of Awakening. Deirdre, tell us about the title and the thoughts behind this work.
Well, titles are always really important to me, and this title is extremely personal. Well, they all are, but this one I wrote really as a response to some of the things that were happening during lockdown. I'm based in London. We have quite a small flat. The whole sort of sense of my world became very small, and the people within it became very, very intimate in a way that we all have experienced. But I think one of the contexts for the idea of the map was, well, one of my other big loves is archaeology. I study that as well as music. And I always go back to looking at sort of prehistory and things from the past. And there's something actually, the more that I write music, the more that I realize that what we did in archaeology and speculating what a place might have looked like from what was left is actually quite akin to the composition process of, you know, finding things within yourself. And I realize that's my obsession with it, is that that's that sense of when you start a new piece, you're kind of taking a map that's broken in your head and trying to put it together. So there is a very strong connection. And also the idea of the map being, my map was very small during the lockdown. You know, the whole idea of walking around a circle in the park was probably the span of it. And something about London, which when you look at the little old-fashioned A to Z maps, is very dense, and there's a lot going on, but you go onto the street and there'd be nothing. And that was very, very unusual. So that sense of the map itself, and then taking it to myself, the whole idea of the map of your emotions was very much, it was very raw, it was very tapped into during that period. And I think people really froze and couldn't write. And there's a lot of my writer friends who said, you know, I didn't write anything at all during that period. I was actually quite productive. And this is the third piece of a kind of response to the lockdown that I've written. I had a really lovely experience working with Kate Ellis and Malachy Robinson on the duo that I wrote for Crash, the reactions piece. And then Malachy and I had also been talking about writing this piece. So that really came out of a journey that I was going on with him through another piece as well. And then we talked very much about his journey through his commissioning of Irish composers, and then putting my work in the context of that was a kind of big responsibility. And then writing for the double bass, well, I had the experience of the double bass for me when I was at Guildhall. I lived with 3 double bass players. So hearing them play scales was quite something. And there's something very earthed about the double bass. Of course, it's a big, grand, deep instrument. And there's something very sort of on the ground about it. So this whole theme seemed to link with that.
So you worked very collaboratively with Malachy, Deirdre. Is this, I mean, I know you've just talked about the piece for Malachy and Kate for double bass and cello, but apart from that work, is this the first solo work for double bass that you've written?
It is, actually, and surprisingly, considering, you know, 3 of my really close friends are double bass players, but I know a lot about the instrument from them. And, you know, the idea of it being within the orchestra and being the massive section, and there's something quite vulnerable about it on its own as well. Yeah. And I'm trying to really get the timbre of the whole spectrum of the instrument.
That's what I was going to ask you, because we're going to hear the premiere of it now, and it was recorded by Malachy for the Contemporary Hour, and unfortunately I haven't had a chance to hear the recording. So can you give us just a flavour of some of the very specific techniques for the double bass that you've tried to possibly explore in the musical map, which is the score?
Yes, well, I've gone beyond the techniques. I like to look at acoustic instruments without electronics and see what other sounds that are potentially there within the instrument. So I've asked him to start with spoons, and he's tapping on the strings. So there's a really delicate, it's almost like the sound is coming out of, he's grabbing the sound as it goes past him in a way. And that was the idea that I had. And then there's huge big swings of phrases. So we're into kind of really high colors, and then the harmonics, and then we're swinging down to the very dense and kind of woofy textures of the instrument, which I love. So, and there's something very physical about the instrument. And, you know, I love Malachy's playing. It's just so tender as well. So there's that whole spectrum of emotions, I think, within the piece, I hope.
Well, we look forward to hearing the premiere, Deirdre, the premiere of this new work by Deirdre Gribbin, Maps of Awakening.
Thank you.
The piece that I'm going to play for you now was commissioned for me by the Sligo International Chamber Music Festival for solo double bass by the composer Deirdre Gribbin. Deirdre lives in London, and because of our lockdown scenario, I haven't been able to meet with her, although I had some interaction with her through sending videos and things like that. But this piece, which is entitled Maps of Awakening, is about, well, Deirdre herself, I imagine, will introduce it also in a video for this festival. But it's about the relationship with maps within the context of a lockdown, where maps can both serve to remind you where you are and also be a medium through which you can have adventures, because looking at a map of somewhere you've never been is also a way to journey there in your mind. And for me, thinking of maps as equivalent to musical notation, that is to say, a piece of music is often called a chart, which is of course another word for a map, that the cartographer who makes the map makes it on a particular day or in a particular period, but when you visit that place later on using the same map, you don't find there what the map maker saw when he was there, or she, because time moves on. And so similarly with pieces of music, I don't know for certain that what I'm going to deliver to you now is exactly what Deirdre had in mind, but in the same way as maps, what she's given me is a way to journey somewhere else and to find what I happen to find there, and hopefully she likes it as much as I do. I found it a very rewarding piece.
I'm delighted to be joined by composer Judith Ring, and Judith, we're about to hear the world premiere of your newest work, Across the Empty Spaces for Accordion. It's a festival commission and your most recent work, so as we might imagine, it's a musical response to a very unmusical year, a year full of challenges of the circumstances of the global pandemic.
Yeah, I basically, when I heard I was going to be writing for Dermot on such a huge and, enormous instrument, really, it's quite a beast of an instrument, the accordion, or can be. So I was very, struck by the fact that I could represent, a lot of the turmoil or kind of mental states that I've personally been through over the past year, and that it would adequately represent the kind of mood or kind of spirit of what people have gone through in the past year.
Yeah, well, I've had the great privilege of sitting in the rehearsal just before the recording of the world premiere with Dermot, and certainly there's a mournful quality to it, Judith.
There is, yeah.
And it's very, very powerful. I think you've brought out a side of the accordion that we don't hear so often, this mournful, plaintive side.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with Dermot before, and so I kind of know in detail what the accordion can do in terms of the sounds it can make, because I got him to, I recorded a lot of very unusual sounds from him about 10 years ago for another piece. So I had a kind of detailed idea of what I could kind of manipulate on the accordion, and that can be heard as well in the tape part behind him. So you can do a lot of bending of notes and stuff like that gives that mournful quality that perhaps gives it that almost weeping, yearning kind of feel. So yeah, I kind of use that a lot.
Yeah, and it kind of builds from that feel then to a very intense sections, and it struck me that you used the vibrato very effectively and various other techniques to create this vast sound world, as you say, that the accordion has the potential to get to.
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible working with such sounds, such a sonic landscape, to pull apart. But basically, you can do a lot of shakes and kind of bellows. The bellows can shake kind of wildly in terms of getting a kind of ricochet sound, and you can bend things in different ways. Just basically so many different ways of getting around, like a very intense, almost earthquake of a sound. It's just like this build of bellows kind of crunching up. That can be extremely effective, I think, as a sonic landscape.
An earthquake of a sound, what a great phrase, Judith. But to come back to the title for just a second, Across the Empty Squares, you do say in your programme note something quite specific about what was in your mind's eye a little bit in this piece.
Yeah, I guess, when I was thinking about writing the piece, we're being bombarded by visuals and kind of images from the past kind of year. And, as cliche as it is to write a piece about the thing that's happening right now, for me, it had to be done. And, this idea of, watching, scenes in Italy and Spain and places that have like these large public squares, and they were all empty, they were all completely free of the human life that gives it such a buzz in the first place. And the fact that people were calling to each other from balconies and images like that and ideas like that you were trapped inside, but you could still kind of reach out somehow to across the squares to kind of at least see or wave at your neighbours, and that was the only kind of physical contact a lot of people had, probably not contact, but visual contact people had, for a while.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's cross our fingers that we're coming through that dark tunnel and out the other end of it, and that people can get to Sligo next summer in person to attend the concerts. Just finally, Judith, it struck me when I heard you had a new work for Dermot for accordion, and there's an interesting kind of fact that there are very few works in the Contemporary Music's collection for accordion. In fact, most of them have been written for Dermot. There's about 5 or 6 works in all of the collection for accordion, and now you've actually written 2 because this is not your first work for accordion. From Within an Egg of Space is an older work for you, also written for Dermot.
It was written for Dermot, but also with Concord. So it's a Concord. It was a Concord commission back in 2013 or so, I think. I'm not quite sure that that's the right year, but a long time ago. And Dermot was, the centre stage of that piece, I guess, in some ways, because it's just the sounds that I worked with for him and with him gave it the all-encompassing kind of sound world that came to be. But it was a full ensemble piece, actually, at the end of the day. But that's how I got to know Dermot so well, and I knew what he could do with the accordion, so it's great.
Looking forward to hearing the premiere of this new work, Judith, Across the Empty Squares. And Dermot Dunne takes centre stage in this premiere of this work.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Evonne.